It all started on a quiet Sunday morning, the kind where the world feels slow and safe. I was making coffee when my phone lit up with a message from Vanessa, my cousin, technically, but more like a distant friend. We hadn't spoken much in recent years. She'd moved around a lot, and last I heard, she was in between jobs and boyfriends. The message read, "Hey, I'm in town for a week. Things didn't work out with Mark. I don't really have a place to stay. Can I crash at your place?" I stared at the screen for a moment, hesitating. My husband, Nate, was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone. I asked him what he thought, and he just shrugged. "Sure," he said, without looking up. "If she needs help, let her come. Just a week, right?" I replied yes to her before I could think too hard. Looking back now, I wish I had trusted that tiny knot in my stomach. The one that tightens when something doesn't feel quite right, even if you can't explain it. Vanessa arrived the next day with just a duffel bag and a big smile, like she had no worries in the world. Her energy was magnetic, the kind that makes everyone in the room turn toward her when she laughs. She hugged Nate like they were old friends, even though they'd only met once, years ago. "You haven't changed a bit," she said, giving him a playful wink. I laughed it off. I mean, that's just how Vanessa was. Flirty. Bold. She always had that free spirit vibe I never quite related to. We gave her the guest room, I made her favorite pasta that night, and for a few days, everything felt fine. I even started to enjoy having someone to talk to while Nate was working long hours. But by the third night, I started to notice things. Little things. I came home early from the market one afternoon and found them in the living room, laughing at something on Nate's phone. When they noticed me, they both got quiet, not awkward, just suddenly aware. Then there were the times I'd walk into the kitchen, and she'd stop talking mid-sentence. Or when she wore that red silk robe I hadn't seen since my honeymoon, even though I knew I left it in the guest bathroom. Again, I told myself I was being paranoid. This was my cousin. Nate loved me. We'd been through worse than this, right? Still, I started sleeping with a pit in my stomach. On the sixth day, everything shifted. I was folding laundry when I found a piece of paper crumpled in Nate's jeans pocket. It wasn't a receipt or a note. It was a list of names and numbers, all crossed out. At the bottom, in Vanessa's handwriting, I saw, "Dinner Friday, just us. Don't forget." My heart stopped. Friday was tomorrow. I hadn't been invited. I felt my throat tighten, but I didn't cry. I couldn't. My body wouldn't let me feel anything yet. I just stood there, clutching that stupid note like it was the last thing keeping me upright. That night, I didn't sleep. I waited. At 2:17 a.m., I heard footsteps in the hallway. I quietly got up, opened the door just a crack, and saw it, Vanessa, in that red robe again, slipping out of Nate's room. My room. Our room. She closed the door gently behind her like it was something she did every night. She didn't see me. But I saw her. I saw everything. If you've ever trusted someone so deeply, only to watch them rip your world apart with a smile, you'll understand what I felt in that moment. It's not just the betrayal. It's the humiliation. The quiet, crawling shame that whispers, "You let this happen." And yet, I stayed silent. But not for long. Stories like this are hard to tell, but they're even harder to live. If you've ever felt like no one would believe your side, share this. Someone else needs to know they're not alone. The next morning, I pretended everything was normal. I made breakfast like usual, eggs, toast, coffee. Nate came into the kitchen in sweatpants and a distracted smile, kissed me on the cheek like nothing had happened. Vanessa followed a few minutes later, wearing one of my old t-shirts, humming like she belonged here. I watched them carefully. The way she poured his coffee without asking. The way he thanked her with a soft glance. The way they both avoided my eyes. It was like they had already rehearsed how to act around me. And I was the outsider in my own home. I thought I was going crazy. That maybe I had misunderstood everything. Maybe it wasn't what I thought. Maybe I was reading into things. But something deep inside me had shifted. And once that shift happens, you start noticing everything. At lunch, Nate said he'd be working late again. That was the third time this week. I waited until he left the house, then followed him in my car. He didn't go to the office. He drove to a small cafe on the edge of town, parked in the back, and waited. 5 minutes later, Vanessa walked out from behind the alley and got into the passenger seat like it was the most natural thing in the world. They sat there for over an hour. I couldn't see much from where I was parked, just their silhouettes through the glass. They were close. Too close. I didn't cry. Not then. I just sat in silence, staring, heart pounding, my fingers digging into the steering wheel. I felt like a stranger watching someone else's life collapse in slow motion. When they got back home, I was already inside, pretending to be asleep on the couch. I listened to them whisper in the hallway, then to the sound of her door closing, followed by his. And in the silence of that night, something inside me broke, not from the pain of betrayal, but from the certainty. I wasn't crazy. They were really doing this. Right under my roof. With no shame. The next day, I did something I never thought I'd do. I opened Nate's laptop while he was in the shower. I didn't even have to guess his password. He still used our anniversary. There were no emails. No chats. No browser history. But in the downloads folder, buried beneath receipts and work files, I found it. A photo. It was from a few nights ago. Nate, shirtless, lying in bed. And beside him, Vanessa, wrapped in a blanket, smiling at the camera. She had taken the picture. And he had kept it. I stared at the image for a long time, like it was a scene from a movie, like it wasn't my husband, my guest room, my life. Then I printed it. I didn't scream. I didn't break anything. I just folded it carefully and placed it in a plain white envelope. That evening, I waited at the dinner table. Vanessa came down first, dressed like she was going to a party. Nate followed, freshly shaved, acting like the perfect husband again. I served dinner. We talked. I smiled. And then, just as Nate was about to pour himself a second glass of wine, I slid the envelope across the table and said, "Open it." He froze. Vanessa looked from me to him, confused. Nate opened the envelope, pulled out the photo, and stared at it in silence. Vanessa's face drained of color. I stood up. "I know," I said quietly. "I've known for days. I just wanted to see how far you'd take it." Neither of them said a word. "I let you stay here for a week, Vanessa." "A week? And this is what you do?" She tried to speak, but I raised a hand. "No. You don't get to explain. You don't get to play innocent." I looked at Nate. "And you? You were supposed to protect this home, not invite poison into it." The silence that followed was louder than any scream. That night, I packed a bag and left. Not because I was weak, but because I knew staying would be. Some people think strength means fighting to hold on. But sometimes, it's knowing when to walk away with your dignity intact. There are betrayals that hurt, and then there are the ones that transform you. This one did both. And I wasn't done yet. I spent the first 2 nights at a small motel off the highway. Cheap, quiet, and anonymous, just what I needed. The room smelled like bleach and old smoke, but the sheets were clean and the silence was comforting. I barely slept. Not because I was heartbroken, not yet, but because I kept replaying it all in my head. Every glance. Every laugh. Every moment I ignored my instincts. I had trusted both of them. I had let her in, opened my home, and she had poisoned it from the inside. But what haunted me most wasn't the betrayal itself. It was how easily they did it. How natural it had seemed. Like they had no fear of getting caught. Like I had been invisible all along. On the third day, I went back. Not to stay. Just to collect a few more things. The house felt different. Colder. Vanessa's car was gone, but Nate's was in the driveway. I hesitated at the door, key in hand, unsure of what I'd find inside. When I stepped in, I heard the TV in the background. Nate was on the couch, staring blankly at the screen, holding a beer. The moment he saw me, he stood up fast. "I didn't think you'd come back." "I didn't," I said. "Just came to get the rest of my stuff." He opened his mouth to speak, but I didn't let him. "There's nothing you can say that I want to hear, Nate. You made your choices." "She left," he blurted. "Vanessa. She's gone." I stopped. "Gone where?" He shook his head. "She just packed up yesterday and left. No note. No call." For a brief second, I almost felt bad for him. But then I remembered he had made his bed. And she had been in it. I walked past him and headed to the bedroom. I moved quickly, grabbing the things I had missed before, my journals, a few photos, my necklace box. As I reached into the closet for my old suitcase, something fell from the top shelf. A small cardboard box. It wasn't mine. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. Some recent, others older. All in the same handwriting. I picked one up and started reading. It was from Vanessa. Not to Nate. But to someone named Cole. They were love letters. Secret ones. Full of longing and guilt. Desperate. Messy. Then one sentence jumped out at me. "He doesn't love me. He's just using me to get back at her. I think he still wants her. I think he always did." My hands trembled. So it wasn't just betrayal. It was a twisted game. A triangle of jealousy, revenge, and resentment, and I was the pawn. I confronted Nate. "You weren't in love with her." He blinked. "What? You used her. You used her to punish me." He didn't deny it. Instead, he looked away. "I was angry," he said quietly. "You've been distant for months. You were always tired. Distracted. I felt forgotten." "So you slept with someone else? Someone from my family?" He didn't answer. I nodded slowly. "I hope it was worth it." He looked at me then, truly looked at me, and for the first time I saw it, the guilt. Not just for what he did, but for how little it had changed anything. "I think I ruined everything," he said. "You did," I replied. But that wasn't the end. Later that night, I got a message from an unknown number. It was a photo. Vanessa. Sitting in a car. Crying. The message below read, "You should know. I didn't mean for any of it to happen. I just wanted to feel wanted." There was no name, but I knew it was from her. She hadn't left the city. She was watching from a distance. Hiding. Maybe from me. Maybe from herself. I stared at the screen, wondering what kind of pain leads someone to destroy someone else's life just to feel seen. But I didn't reply. Because some wounds don't need closure, they need distance. And some people don't deserve a response. Now, with the house behind me and the truth finally out, all that remained was what came next. Rebuilding. Healing. And deciding who I would be after this. Because the person I had been, trusting, naive, soft, she didn't live here anymore. And the woman rising from her ashes was just getting started. A week passed. Then two. I found a small apartment on the other side of town. Nothing fancy, a third-floor walk-up with squeaky floors and a leaky faucet. But it was mine. Quiet. Safe. A place without ghosts. I started filling it with small things. A plant I named Ruth. A thrift store armchair that didn't match anything. New sheets, new mugs, new silence. And slowly, the air stopped tasting like heartbreak. Sometimes, in the early morning, I'd still reach out across the bed expecting to find Nate there. Muscle memory. But I wouldn't cry. I was done mourning a man who had never really been mine, not fully. Because now, I could see it clearly. It wasn't just about Vanessa. Or the affair. It was about all the times I shrank myself to keep the peace. All the moments I smiled when I wanted to scream. All the versions of myself I erased to be what he needed, never once asking what I needed. And that's what hurt the most. I had betrayed myself long before he ever did. One afternoon, I was unpacking boxes when I found an old notebook. The one I used to write in before I met Nate. Back when I still had dreams of becoming a writer. Before I convinced myself that love was more important than voice. I flipped through the pages, poems, stories, fragments of thoughts I'd buried under grocery lists and calendars. And I felt something stir. Like the first breath after holding it in too long. That night, I wrote for hours. About the betrayal, the silence, the fury. About Vanessa. About me. Not as a victim. But as a witness. To my own rebirth. The next day, I submitted one of those stories to a blog for women's narratives. It got published. Then shared. Then featured. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel used. I felt heard. Nate reached out eventually. A message. Just one. I'm sorry. For everything. I stared at it for a long time. Not with rage, not with longing. Just clarity. I didn't reply. Because healing isn't about revenge. It's about no longer needing the apology. And as for Vanessa, I never heard from her again. Maybe she moved away. Maybe she didn't. But I stopped checking. Some chapters don't need sequels. Just endings. A few weeks later, I was walking through a park near my new place when I saw a couple on a bench, laughing, holding hands, alive in their own little world. For a second, I felt that familiar ache. That craving to be loved like that. But then I realized something. I didn't need what they had. Because I was learning to love something else. Myself. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, if you've ever felt invisible in your own home, I want you to know this. You're not alone. And you're not broken. Sometimes, we lose everything we thought we needed, only to discover what we truly are. Stronger. Wiser. And finally, free. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, share it. Let someone else know they're not the only one. And if you want to hear more stories like this, subscribe to the channel. We'll be here. Always.